I requested it, you waited for it, it's time for the firmware update to the Razer Kitsune. This is super exciting because it adds a bunch of SOCD modes and other improvements to this controller, most of which are things that I mentioned in my initial review for this product. SOCD modes have been added to this controller. Before, it really felt like it was designed just for playing Street Fighter 6. But there were a number of shortcuts and input methods that completely weren't possible with this controller if you were playing legacy games or games that don't require the Street Fighter 6 SOCD rule set. They've also added changes that increase the functionality of the tournament lock switch mode. Let's jump straight into it. So make sure you've got the update downloaded from the support page, double click on the app, and then it'll ask you to plug in your Kitsune. Just click the update button, it should only take a few seconds, and then it's straight off to the races. Now before you actually change any of the modes, everything should work as normal. Left and right is still neutral, and down and up is still neutral. This is the default setting and the one that you'll definitely be wanting to use if you're playing Street Fighter 6 in tournament. But of course, if you're playing other games where those rules do not apply, or if you just don't care about the rules and you're just playing online and you want to do things your way, and there are plenty of reasons why you may want to do so, let's try out these new SOCD modes. The main one you're going to want to try is down plus up equals up, and the reason is that because for like 10 years, that has been basically the way that these SOCD rules have worked and people are used to it. In order to switch to it, we need to go to lock mode over here, put that in lock mode, then click the create button, the PS button, and the down button. And let's press down and up. And as you can see, absolute up priority, which is what they're calling it. And the first reason this is exciting is because obviously many people have muscle memory from 10 years of gaming with this type of platform, and they're going to want that feature available on their controller. But secondly, there are games where this is just tactically probably faster and easier and more consistent for games where you do things like super jumps. Now, as you can see in Street Fighter 6, this is not important because it does not lead to a super jump when you press down before you press up, but in games like King of Fighters and in most anime fighters, you do get a super jump. To demonstrate what I mean about super jumping, I'm here in Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising, and as you can see, when I press down and then up, I only get neutral. If I switch myself over to absolute up priority, then now when I press down and then up, instead, I will always get up when these two buttons are pressed at the same time. And the reason this is so useful is that, as you can see, this is a normal jump, and it has very different properties to the super jump, which I can do by pressing down and then up. And if I'm in this special mode, which is now available to us thanks to this update, I can actually do super jump really easily just by plinking, I guess you would call it. And it's super easy to just input super jumps like this. And it's one of the things that I used to love the most about leverless controllers, and it kind of changed after Capcom changed their rules for Street Fighter 6. Super easy to time compared to having to let go of the down button to avoid ending up in neutral, which, remember, is the double-edged sword that kind of makes leverless controllers amazing, but also kind of problematic. Speaking of which, some people do complain about leverless controllers because they make certain characters that have 360 inputs difficult to do, and as you know, Nier has one of the best 360 inputs because you can actually do self-destruct. But to do a 360 input on a leverless controller, you have to do this with your fingers, and for this particular input, you have to do it twice. But just to clear things up, this is down to technique, and it's not impossible to overcome on a leverless controller. So I'll just show you. I'm in the standard left-right equals neutral and down-up equals neutral rules that you will find in Street Fighter 6. And if I just show you right here, it is possible to do a double 360 motion on a leverless as long as you practice and you're used to doing it like that. So what I'm really trying to say here is skill issue. The other thing is that I thought this shortcut had been removed, but as you can see that even in up priority, forward down jump like this does lead to a Dragon Punch shortcut. There was a time when they said that this shortcut had been removed, but it looks like it's still in the game. Just to show you how it would normally work in default mode, which is create button, PS button, and then up, you can see that down plus up equals neutral again, and the shortcut still works. So it's forward, down, forward, forward because of the SOCD leading to the forward motion. Mainly I thought I would just need it to go back to games like Street Fighter 5 and other previous games. But as you can see, in default mode, it seems to work, and also in up priority mode, also seems to work. The next exciting mode you're going to want to try is last input priority, and that's super useful for a character like Guile who uses charge motions in classic mode. So if you're holding down back for 2 seconds, you normally have to press forward and a button to end up with your sonic boom. But originally you didn't have last input priority, and so you always had to let go of back before you press to the forward and punch buttons in order to get the sonic boom. However, this has now changed. Lock switch, create, home button, and then the right button. Holding left goes back, and holding right now actually just moves you forward instead of being in neutral. You just hold down back, and when you want to do the fireball, you don't have to let go of the back button at all. You've got literally, as far as I'm aware, 0 frames between your inputs from holding down back or back to block and pressing forward to do your sonic boom, and you're instantly blocking again as soon as possible after your recovery frames have finished, of course. Now, in most tournament rules, I'm pretty sure that this is not allowed, but I'm not 100% sure because I think the rules actually do vary between the games. So if this is allowed in tournaments, then obviously that's awesome. But then again, if you're playing at home, unless there are ways for the game to know what inputs are actually coming in from your controller, and there might be ways to find out in the future, no one's ever going to know what input priority mode you're using. And if there's a way that makes it easier for you to enjoy a game, then there is no one who can tell you to do it otherwise. If you find that this method of input is more fun for you, absolutely fine. If they want to enforce that a rule is made where you can't use this mode, then fine. At a tournament, they're just gonna have to test your controller and say you can't use that mode. But when you're at home, just enjoying a game, do whatever you want if it makes the game more fun for you. Now, there's one mode in here I've actually never heard of before. It's called First Input Priority, and if you press Create, PS, and X on the controller, cross rather, even if you're holding back and then you press forward, the final input will just be ignored. This appears to be the same with the down and up buttons. If you are jumping like this, holding down jump, and then you press down, absolutely nothing's going to happen. The only situation I can think of where this might actually be kind of important or useful is if you're pressing something like down back and then you don't want the jump to come out when you press jump. You want to be able to let go of the down button in order to get the input out. And who knows, there might be a shortcut that is easier because of this. But as you can see, if I press up, I don't go into neutral and I don't go into jump, but I could do a let go of a button and press a kick button like this in order to get my flash kick input. So if I go back into up priority mode, normally I could press down back and then press these two buttons at the same time, and I would get my flash kick without ever having to let go of these two buttons over here. But if you wanted to do the opposite, then if I'm pressing down back to block and then I press up, absolutely nothing happens, but I will get a flash kick when I let go of the kick button, like so. You never really know what fighting gamers are going to come up with. Now, before we go on to talk about other features of the SOCD modes, one thing I do want to also thank Razer for is that this is super easy to do on the fly. A lot of controllers, you actually have to unplug it from the machine and then hold down a button with your left hand while trying to plug in a USB-C cable with your right hand, and sometimes it could be a fiddly mess. But that is not all, beanbags. They've apparently actually watched my review video and they've decided to make all the changes I suggested. So when you would normally go into tournament lock mode with this switch, if you actually pressed the R3 or the L3 buttons, you wouldn't get anything because the whole control panel was shut off. They thought all of these buttons really dangerous and they don't want you to disqualify yourself. But you want access to these buttons even when you're in tournament lock mode. And why? Because as you can see, this is the standard all button layout, but more recently you have seen a lot of companies putting extra buttons, especially on the left and right side of this thumb jump button right here. Whether I have tournament lock disengaged or engaged, I still have access to L3 and R3, and that is super useful because in Street Fighter you're allowed to have up to 11 action buttons. You'd also have buttons set to drive impact, and you'd also have a parry button which you can use for drive rush. And that would be it. That would be all of your 8 action buttons normally, but now with this firmware we've also got access to R3 and L3, which I've set to 3 punches and 3 kicks. If I'm doing a move that can be cancelled using this dash, I can actually now do fireball motion like this, and I can actually tap the R3 button like this to do my cancels. Is it as nice as having a large button? Maybe not, and also you do have to use probably your ring finger or your middle finger to press these buttons, but even in tournament lock switch mode, I can now do something like this, dash cancel out of it. This is also useful for Ken, which is the character I normally play, because if I do a dragon punch, it's just normal like that, but if I press 2 kicks or 3 kicks before this, I get the Fire version. If you happen to be playing on PlayStation, you will also gain access to the touchpad when you're in tournament lock mode. So that's it for the main changes through this update, but there is actually one last thing that is also changed, and it is apparently the quality of the animation on these lights. As you can see, if I hold down the create button and then press R1, I can sift through different speeds of this animation, and I do think it was a little bit less smooth before, but as you can see, at this speed you can't really tell anyway, but at the slow speed it does seem a little bit smoother. Don't know if this is all just placebo effect, but apparently the animations have been slightly improved on this. So that's pretty much it for the big firmware update to the Razer Kitsune. Obviously, if you don't require any of these SOCD modes, you're probably fine to just continue using the original firmware, but if you do want access to these SOCD modes so that you can, in addition to Street Fighter V Vanilla, you can also go back and play all of your favorite legacy fighting games, and even just games like Street Fighter V. There were certain shortcuts that are now possible again thanks to these SOCD modes. But also, if you just prefer to play fighting games using different SOCD modes, like holding down 2 buttons in order to jump instead of having to always let go of down every time you want to do a jump, there are so many reasons why you might want to take advantage of the SOCD modes that are available now thanks to this update. And it's just really nice that not only have they added these useful features to the tournament lock mode, but it's just really nice to see that they're always listening and making changes as soon as they can. If you want to watch more videos about controllers, and especially the review for this Kitsune controller, definitely check out this video next. I've been NihongoGamer. That's all for now. I'll see you real soon.